Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the most famous origin story in all of human history, the tale of Adam and Eve. Now, you know the basics, right? Garden, snake, a forbidden apple, the first man and woman making a choice that changes, well, literally everything. It's an origin story deeply baked into our culture, our art, and our literature. But what if the version we all grew up with, the one passed down for generations, is actually missing half the story? Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to strip away centuries of assumptions and look directly at the source texts themselves and explore the pretty radical ways scholars and storytellers have interpreted them.
For a lot of us, this story feels totally fixed. It feels set in stone, just a straightforward A to B sequence of events from the dawn of time. But, as we're about to see, the original Hebrew text actually leaves room for a massive mystery. There's this narrative glitch hidden right there in the very first pages, a glitch that's kept scholars arguing for centuries. But before we get to the glitch itself, let's ground ourselves in why this specific story matters so much and why picking apart these ancient words is way more than just some dry academic exercise.
You see, traditionally, Adam and Eve carry immense theological weight. They underpin this foundational idea that humanity is a single family descended from shared ancestors. And how you read their story literally shapes how billions of people view human nature. In Christianity, for instance, this narrative is the bedrock for the doctrines of the fall of man and original sin, the idea that humanity inherited a sort of brokenness from this very first act of disobedience. But, it's really important to remember this. Interpretation isn't universal. In Islam, the concept of original sin doesn't even exist. Instead, Adam and Eve shared the blame equally for their mistake. They're both forgiven by God, and Islamic tradition actually holds that after leaving paradise, they were joyfully reunited on the plain of Arafat near Mecca. So, how you read this text dictates whether you believe we're inherently flawed or just prone to mistakes but fully capable of redemption.
So let's play detective for a minute. Let's zoom in on the source material itself, because the inciting incident for this whole debate is a really fascinating textual anomaly right at the beginning of Genesis. Normally, when you read chapters 1 and 2, you logically expect a single, continuous story, right? But instead, for literally thousands of years, ancient rabbis and modern scholars have noticed that there are actually two completely distinct accounts of how humans were made.
Think about it. Genesis 1 says male and female, God created them, bam, simultaneously. They arrive in the text together. But then you flip the page to Genesis 2, and suddenly it's a step-by-step process. In this version, God fashions the man first from the dust, puts him in Eden, realizes he needs a companion, makes all the animals, and only then creates woman from the man's rib. So what's going on here? Which one is it? Did they arrive together side by side, or was the man flying solo first?
To figure out this glaring contradiction, we're going to look at two incredibly different approaches people have used to make sense of the text. First, we'll dive into a rigorous linguistic analysis, which is basically dusting off ancient dictionaries to find completely new meanings in very old words. And then we're going to look at a highly creative storytelling tradition, something you might playfully call ancient rabbinic fan fiction, used to bridge that gap between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Both paths are absolutely fascinating, and they take us on entirely different journeys.
Let's kick things off with the analytical approach. In her landmark book, Woman Spirit Rising, feminist theologian Phyllis Tribble performs a really deep, radical rereading of the original Hebrew. Her work challenges that centuries-old interpretation that the Genesis text inherently justifies male supremacy and female subordination. Tribble argues that if we actually put aside all our built-in preconceptions and look at the original Hebrew vocabulary in its historical context, a totally different story emerges.
Tribble points out that the original Hebrew word Adam, which we usually just translate straight into the guy's name, Adam, is actually a generic term for humankind. It's derived from the word Adamah, meaning earth or dirt. This means the very first creature wasn't a guy named Adam at all. According to Tribble, this original entity encompassed both sexes. It was a literal earthling made from the dirt, completely androgynous. In fact, it isn't until the creation of the woman that the text actually differentiates between male and female parts. Before that, just a unified genderless earth creature.
Then, Tribble zeroes in on another key Hebrew word, azer, which historically has almost always been translated into English as helper. Now, for centuries, this specific translation has been used to imply that the woman was created as a subordinate assistant to the man. Like he's the undisputed main character and she's just the supporting act. But Tribble dives deep into the linguistic context of this exact word and uncovers what she calls a massive misunderstanding.
She points out that Ezer actually translates more accurately to an equal counterpart, or even a savior. To prove this, she notes that in the wider Old Testament, the word Ezer is frequently used to describe God himself as a helper and savior to Israel. Now think about that. If God is called an Ezer, the word clearly implies immense power and absolute equality. It definitely doesn't mean inferior. If anything, it denotes a position of profound strength. So translating it simply as a subordinate helper completely misrepresents the text, and it unravels that whole idea of female subordination that's been projected onto the story.
Furthermore, Trimble highlights that the woman being formed from the rib is actually a symbol of solidarity and equality. It's bone of bone, flesh of flesh, mutuality, not subordination. And let's look at that famous temptation scene with the serpent, because this is where things get really fascinating. Trimble points out that during the dialogue with the snake, the woman acts as an intelligent, reasoning theologian. She contemplates the tree, evaluates the physical and intellectual merits of the fruit, and makes an autonomous decision. Meanwhile, the man, who was right there with her, is just kind of standing there. He's completely passive, silent, and essentially just eats what's handed to him without a second thought.
So Tribble's ultimate takeaway from all this analysis is pretty profound. She argues that male supremacy and female subordination were never part of God's original design. Instead, they were the punishment for a corrupted world. When God tells the woman after the fall that her husband will rule over her, Tribble says this is a tragic description of a sinful, broken reality, not the ideal, perfect state of Eden. The original design was perfect harmony and equality. The hierarchy only showed up after the disobedience. It's a massive shift in how we understand this foundational text.
Okay, so that's how a linguist solves the glitch. But what if we approach this whole Genesis discrepancy, not with a dictionary, but with our imagination? Ancient Jewish rabbis saw the exact same contradiction between Genesis 1 and 2, but instead of dissecting the vocabulary, they figured a piece of the story must simply be missing. They shifted from analysis to pure narrative to connect the dots.
Historically, rabbis used a form of commentary called midrash. Think of midrash as an ancient way of expanding a universe's lore, or, patching up plot holes. If two verses clashed, or if a conversation seemed to just abruptly end, rabbis wouldn't delete the confusing parts. Instead, they'd write a brand new story to weave them together. This wasn't seen as rewriting the Bible, but rather uncovering its hidden depths and answering the very natural questions the text provoked for its readers.
To solve this two-creation glitch, ancient rabbis created a midrash centered around a character named Lilith. According to this legend, the woman created simultaneously with man in Genesis 1 was Lilith. Because she was created at the exact same time from the exact same earth, she was Adam's absolute equal. But, the story goes, Adam demanded she submit to him, and since they were made from the same dirt, Lilith vehemently refused to be treated as a subordinate, and she actually fled the Garden of Eden entirely. Because Adam was left all alone, God then created Eve in Genesis 2, fashioning her from Adam's rib so she might be, well, a bit more compliant.
Now, for centuries, folklore cast Lilith as a literal monster. Because she rebelled against Adam, ancient rabbinic traditions vilified her as this terrifying, baby-stealing demoness who roamed the night. But fast forward to the 1970s, and feminist theologians looked at this demonized figure and saw something entirely different. They stripped away the monster myth and saw the original independent woman who simply demanded equality. This incredible 180-degree turn made the ancient midrash a huge catalyst for a new generation of writers wanting to explore female viewpoints in religious spaces.
Enter scholar Judith Plaskow. In 1972, she did something absolutely brilliant. She wrote a midrash on a midrash. Her story, titled The Coming of Lilith, transformed this fearsome ancient rival into a wise, brave woman. Plaskow took that old rabbinic tale that tried to solve the Genesis glitch, and she spun it forward, asking a massive what-if question. What if Adam's two wives didn't actually hate each other? What if they met? In Plaskow's reimagining, Eve doesn't just stay complacent in the garden, she gets curious about what lies beyond the boundaries. So, she wanders to the walls of Eden, and, unexpectedly, she meets Lilith. But instead of fighting over Adam, the two women just start talking. They share their unique experiences, they laugh, they cry, and they realize they have way more in common than they ever thought. Through this meeting, Eve and Lilith build a profound, unbreakable bond of sisterhood, realizing their shared strength completely outside of Adam's control.
Plaskow ends her story with this absolutely breathtaking image. She writes, "And God and Adam were expectant and afraid the day Eve and Lilith returned to the garden, bursting with possibilities, ready to rebuild it together." This is so brilliant because it flips the entire dynamic of the original myth. I mean, why are Adam and God afraid?
Because this alliance between Eve and Lilith completely threatens the established patriarchal order. It represents a brand new world based on partnership and mutual respect, not hierarchy.
So, what does this all mean for us? Well, what both Trimble's linguistic analysis and Plaschko's creative midrash prove is that these ancient texts aren't just dusty relics locked away in some museum. They are living, breathing narratives that continue to provoke, challenge, and inspire us today. Whether you're analyzing ancient Hebrew with a fine-tooth comb or writing a modern midrash to expand the lore, the very act of engaging with the text keeps it incredibly relevant to our modern lives.
By applying new lenses, we literally unlock new worlds. Whether it's realizing that the word Adam just meant a unified earthling, or turning a vilified mythological demon into a powerful symbol of sisterhood, changing the lens changes absolutely everything. What seemed like a rigid story of inevitable hierarchy and original sin can, when you look closer, reveal vibrant themes of deep equality, shared responsibility, and incredible human agency.
I'll leave you with this final thought. If the oldest, most endlessly debated story in human history can still be flipped on its head to reveal entirely new, profound meanings, what other stories in your own life or in our shared culture are just waiting for a second look? Keep questioning